Now, our next speaker we're going to talk about is going to bring the solutions back to food and how we take care of ourselves. Because I also agree, and you've heard me talk about and others talk about this idea of exiting and building from the system. Rather than trying to vote them out or let's go storm the Capitol, why don't we exit from their system and build something better? And she talked about opting out of the vaccines, but also if we get blocked out of the grocery stores because you refuse a vaccine or you don't want to take a PCR test or whatever, then you're going to have to learn how to grow your own food, or at least have those networks with other people in your community. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Last thing I want to say before we introduce our next speaker is please do continue to send in your watch party photos. We've got lots of awesome cat photos of people watching with their cats. We're going to pop those on screen real quick. And we've got people, I want to shout out to Zimbabwe, to I think I saw Romania, all across Europe, all across the US as well. We can get the cat photos on the next one. We'll bring Jonathan on now. But yeah, my point is there's lots of people watching from all over the world, and we like seeing you guys' faces and showing people that, hey, people are gathering. You know, people are coming together despite restrictions. So let's talk about food now. Let's talk about how we can survive and thrive in this age, this era that we're facing in the face of the Great Reset, and how we can build a better world. Let's bring on Jonathan Ramirez from Thriving Earth Farms and hear what he has to say to us. His talk today is Subsistence and Survival in the Age of Instability. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so first I just want to say thank you to Derek and John for all the work you're doing, putting this stuff together, and anyone who's behind the scenes working on stuff. Thank you, guys. Yeah, this year we've kind of been launched into a world that has made a lot of things apparent to us about the instability and fragility of our food systems. So I'm going to try and share my screen here. And there we go. All right. Let's see, did that come up all right? There we go. Yeah, so I just finished getting this full screen set up. Yeah, so I can't really get it to go on the full screen, but you guys see it, so that's kind of what's important. Yeah, so I have a farm just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and it's called Thriving Earth Farm. And we do a lot of different farming, homesteading, survival sort of things. And throughout our time doing what we do, we've kind of learned and looked at what the elements and the pillars of resilience are. So I'm just going to talk about that. I'm probably not going to get into everything that I want to say, but I hope that some of this stuff is valuable to both the person who's just getting into homesteading and survival, and even the more experienced people as well. This is sort of what we're going to talk about and get into. And let's just go for it. So the bad news, I'll start off with the bad news. I don't want to be too doom and gloom because there's a lot of good things to look at, but the realistic portion of where we're at is something that we need to look at. So humanity is at a very unprecedented time in human history because we are at an unprecedented level of instability and fragility in our survival systems, right? We have survival systems that are dependent on chemicals, global centralized transport systems, electricity, gas, oil, and these big sort of monolithic corporations and regulations from government. So there's something incredibly fragile about that, about monoculture, agriculture, and about just our entire system. There's other things that are also making our situation more fragile, such as the fact that we have to also deal with increased toxicity in our landscape, fragmented communities, loss of knowledge and skills, and the sort of social political landscape. All that being said, humanity has faced a lot of social, political upheaval, civil unrest, and a lot of issues in the past, but never before has humanity basically been at a situation where we've been so removed from our ability to survive off the land, right? After the Industrial Revolution and the subsequent Green Revolution and the Tech Revolution that occurred in agriculture, more and more people have become removed from our actual subsistence and survival from the earth. So never before have we been this fragile, and that's sort of, it's sort of a scary thing to look at, but it's also a very important thing for us to look at too, and it can kind of gear how we move forwards in response to what's happening in the world today. Because obviously the people at the Great Reset, they have one idea, and if we don't want that idea, we got to show what the other ones are. The good news is that everything we've ever needed to survive and thrive has always been here. I want to make an emphasis to say that, you know, we don't need to invent all these new technologies or any sort of, you know, crazy new systems or anything like that. We've always had everything that we need to survive and thrive, right? We have an earth which sustains life, and if we team with it, we can be supported. So that's the good news. Another part of the good news is that it's all in our genetic memory to be a part of the earth and to work with the earth. We all come from a tribe. I heard Derek Bros say that on the first day, like, we all come from a tribe. We all come from an ancestry that saw the earth as the provider of all life and lived in that way. So part of what the good news is we can draw from that memory, and we can kind of come back home based on that knowledge. And then the other thing is that the illusion is becoming really clear, and a lot of people are yearning for solutions and yearning for truth as the illusion becomes more and more apparent. So we're at a crisis moment. There's a lot of potential for what we can do. We can harvest all the lost knowledge. We can come in with solutions, and everything that we need is here waiting for us to do that. So what is it? What is the essence of what we need as far as physical sustainability and survival? What's the essence of it? I think we need a massive push for more and more people to work towards fulfilling our needs of survival in regenerative and decentralized ways, right? So we don't need more people working for AI or Google or Citigroup or, you know, the Fed or whatever. We need more people working towards meeting our physical survival in regenerative and decentralized ways, because in my view, and from what I've come to see, is that we can't ever be free unless we live in that sort of way. We're always going to be dependent on these fragile systems if we don't find a way to live without them. So that's what, you know, the solution-oriented nature of this whole event is about. But going beyond sort of like prepper sort of side of it, of like, oh, we're very fragile, we need to change our systems, right? The more sort of reactive way. There's also the other side of it, which is really sort of where I started coming from after I started waking up to the whole political side of things, is that it's really a part of our sacred human purpose and a part of our sacred responsibility to live in harmonious ways with the earth. And decentralized, localized, regenerative, diverse systems is actually how we do that. So it's not just about, you know, preventing catastrophe, though it is. It's also about, you know, living with honor and living with that sacred responsibility. So within sustainability and homesteading and survivalism and all that stuff, there's a few different areas of focus. If you were just in the forest and you were in some emergency survival situation, you might just think about food, water, and shelter. But if we're thinking about restructuring our society in a way that you know, promotes true sustainability, we have to look at a few different areas besides just food, water, and shelter. So we need to look at health, and food is health, so that's a major thing. But how that informs us is the diversity of food. And it's not just about survival, it's about producing food that is diverse and super healthy, right? Then talking about shelters, right? And where we're living, a lot of the way that our homes and shelters have been created is they're very toxic. They're not very protective, and they're unsustainable. So an example is most people heat their homes or cool their homes with electricity or gas or propane or oil, or a lot of different unsustainable ways of kind of keeping them protected from the elements, right? And we have to re-examine that, and that's why the power of natural building is really important. The other thing to think about too with shelters is maybe we can build shelters that protect us from EMF or protect us from other kind of intrusions into our life. So shelter is really important. Another area of focus is medicine. We need to get back into herbal medicine, and we have to be able to produce that locally and sustainably. Then I have sustainable essential products. What does that mean? That means any sort of tool or item that we use to keep our homesteading systems going, and being able to produce those in a good regenerative way, right? If we need harvest baskets and the global industrial infrastructure is collapsing and we can't get plastic harvest totes, how are we gonna have things to harvest in, right? We can make baskets. It's a part of our tradition, and they're natural baskets made from natural materials around you are super beautiful. And also tools, same thing with tools. How are we going to produce hand tools? How are we going to produce all the different things that we need to keep our systems going sustainably? So that's a huge important area of focus. Next is clean water. How do we clean our water? How do we have multiple water systems to keep our survival going, right? If the city water gets contaminated, or if the city water is based on a pumping mechanism that goes down, how are people going to get water, right? We have to look at that, and we have to examine the different ways that we can do that. Another area of focus is energy. So what is energy? Mainly we need energy to power electronics, right? And that's mostly a need, or that's mostly a want and not a need. But the things that we do need energy for is for food preservation and for heating and cooling, basically. So there's other ways to meet those needs of survival, of preserving our food, and of heating and cooling our homes besides electricity, which is what we use now. So we got to think about energy. And if we do want to have electricity, how do we do it in resilient and sustainable ways? So we got to think about that. Another thing to think about is waste or fertility management. Composting. If you're in an area that has sewers and the sewer system gets compromised, or if you're in a country where those systems have collapsed, how do we deal with that situation in ways that are not creating, health issues, basically? We have to look at that. And then, of course, spiritual survival is also a part of survival. But I won't talk too much on that because I think my focus here is sustainability and homesteading. So next. Yeah, so a lot of people have heard a lot of these different terms that I have up here: regenerative farming, organic gardening, agroforestry, tree crops, foraging, all that sort of stuff. And there might be some people out there who say animal systems are evil and we have to get rid of them. Or there might be people that say animal systems and tree crop systems are good, but grain agriculture and annual systems are the most destructive thing for the earth, right? And we can kind of get into these dogmatic camps. But I think if we're actually really going to become sustainable, and if we're actually going to become resilient as the system gets more and more fragile, and if we don't want to be dependent on whatever system they create for us, we're going to have to use every single tool that we have at our disposal to get sustainable. So that's going to, every single one of these things, if you want to take a a screenshot of all these different things. These are the things that we need to look at and start learning about and start understanding. And these are all the things that we need to put in our toolkit for bringing our society from this very unsustainable, fragile state to a state of sustainability. So as far as steps go for the beginners, I wanted to hit these points before I go into the pillars of resilience, because I think it's important to just get an idea of where you can start. For the beginner, I think one of the most underrated kind of important steps for the beginner is learning how to wild forage. I think realistically that's the lowest hanging fruit, is to go out into your local ecology and to say, what is the natural world already providing and how can I ride that wave, right? You would be surprised how much is out there. A good example of like one of the most abundant wild forage crops that exist out there are acorns from oak trees. Oaks are pretty common throughout most of the world and can be a huge staple crop for people, and it's often something that's overlooked. And that's just one example. There's walnuts and hickory nuts and beech nuts and some areas hazelnuts and berries and mushrooms and fruits and all sorts of stuff that we can draw from. And I think that that's the lowest hanging fruit. You don't have to develop a system. You don't really need many tools. You just go out there, you get it, and you use your knowledge to process them. That's maybe the biggest first step that I think most people can take, especially if you have limitations on what you can do. The next thing that I didn't really hear spoken about in some of the other talks was the ability to volunteer on a local organic farm in your area. I think even if it's just one day a week or one day every other week or whatever, it's such a super powerful tool in, number one, becoming more sustainable, because likely if you're volunteering a full long day on an organic farm, they're going to give you a share of their farm, CSA share or some vegetables or something, and likely they'll even give you more. So you'll have food coming in through that, but then also you're going to learn more working alongside people who are already doing it than you'll ever learn from reading books and watching videos and sort of being in your head about it. If you're out there on an organic farm, working, it's really going to jumpstart you in your knowledge if you're a beginner. The next thing is learn from the elders. There's a lot of older people who still have skills on how to do a lot of this stuff, whether it's, the old timer down the road who knows how to work with mules still, or, the old woman next door that still keeps a huge garden and has learned all of these little tricks of the trade. It's not to say that everything they say is gold. There's a lot of older people who are stuck in old paradigms about how to do things and stuff. But all that being said, there's wisdom to be gathered, and we should do that. Next is, just learning more, reading books on permaculture and homesteading, taking a permaculture design course, which I think is a really good idea, to kind of kickstart your knowledge on homesteading and such. The other thing too is if you can't buy a piece of property, start a big garden, raise all these animals, but you want to make a step and you don't know where to go, an option is joining an eco community, joining people who are already doing it and becoming a beneficial part of someone else's system. If you don't have the tools or the capacity to just like start from the ground up on your own, whether it's money or time or whatever, join something. People are always looking for extra help. People are looking for people who resonate with them and want to do the type of work, and are excited to learn. So that's another option too. If you do want to start something, obviously start small and start a garden, start raising chickens and ducks, start learning some traditional crafts. I think traditional crafts are a really great tool for becoming more sustainable, right? Learn how to build things yourself. and learn how to build things yourself with traditional tools. And that can help you become more sustainable. The last major step for the beginner, I think, is making a list of all the different products that you consume in a year, and then coming up with a plan on how to produce or obtain them locally or sustainably. So it's not to say that you have to produce all your food or even like 70% of your food yourself. It's to say, hey, I can do this right here, right now where I'm at. But how can I obtain those other things from, let's say, a local farm? Who in the area has grass-fed, rotationally grazed, organic dairy products, or who has a bunch of fruits in the fall, and how can I get some of that? And really sort of making a plan on how to get sustainable. So yeah, those are good steps for the beginner. And I'll also say that there are some things that are much easier to sustain in a diet than other things. And you might find in your local ecology, in your local situation, that it's easier for you to get grass-fed beef than it is for you to get fruit, or it is for you to get organic, sustainably raised grains, right? So you might have to adjust your diet a little bit to become more resilient in the face of a fragile global system. So then there's some actionable steps for the experience for people who are already farming, people who already have, big gardens and are homesteading. And, there's always ways that we can become more resilient and sustainable. One example is community. A lot of times people start a homestead and the first thing that they realize is that they just can't do it all. And the manageability of what they're trying to do comes into question, right? So you can either reduce what you're doing, or you can engage in community. You can bring people into your project, give them a role, give them a space, or you can connect with the larger community that's outside of yourself and plan and communicate and grow with them in a way that makes the whole unit a little bit more sustainable. That's sort of what the freedom cells are about. But you can also bring that in and get a little bit more intimate and become, let's say, like an eco-village. Next is entertaining draft power as a tool for sustainability. So a lot of annual agriculture, vegetable production, grain production, etc., are all heavily dependent on tractors, right? Small systems can be maintained easily just by human power, right? But if you want to scale up those systems and be more productive, and you don't want to rely on a tractor that if it breaks and you can't get apart, your whole system falls apart, that's not resilient. You need something that's a little bit more resilient. And draft power, which is the power of horses, mules, and oxen, and a few other things, those are very resilient systems, because horses and oxen and mules can be replicated naturally through their own biological reproduction, and they can be sustained not off of oil that needs to be mined out of the earth and shipped all around the world, but from grass and from hay. And horses and draft power in general as a method of becoming more resilient is, I think, a very dramatically underestimated tool, and something that's really important. When we look at indigenous cultures and tribal and traditional farming communities, we'll find that animals are very resilient part of their system. Next, for the experienced person, for actionable steps is, just asking the question: if the oil stopped flowing or the power went down, could you carry on unhindered? If the power grid goes down and all of your stored vegetables are in an electrically powered cooler, you might run into some problems. So maybe we get some solar panels to, power that unit, right? Or maybe you don't have the money for those solar panels. Then what do you do, right? Or maybe you have solar panels, but there was a big windstorm or a hurricane, like what happened in Puerto Rico, where a bunch of solar panels got damaged, and now you don't have a way of keeping that food cool. So what do you do? And that gets into more passive systems, right? Into root cellars and food preservation and all that sort of stuff. So always asking these different questions of, if the system went down, how would the different elements of my system carry on unhindered? That's the most important question for all experienced growers moving forward. The next thing is, don't wait for your systems don't wait for tomorrow to get your systems down, right? So if your system has a weakness, don't wait for collapse or for some major hiccup in the system to kind of work on your systems and get them more sustainably, because then you're going to be, panicking, right? If you can't get gas or oil or fuel and you have this big, production scale agricultural system, you're not going to be able to keep it going if you don't have, tractors, gas, oil, or draft animals, right? You can buy a draft animal, but you don't get that system down overnight. It takes time, it takes training, it takes work. So as much preparing that we can do now, the better. Yeah, so moving on to the pillars of resilience, right? What makes a resilient farm or homestead? And looking at all the different farms and systems that I've seen, I think passive systems that are diverse, redundant, and regenerative are the most resilient to all the different things that can be thrown at us, whether from nature or from the economy or from political forces or social forces. Those are going to be the most powerful systems moving forward, and the most resilient. So what does that look like more specifically, right? So diversity, right? We need to, like we were saying earlier, we need to use every tool available. Not only do we need diversity in the things that we produce, right? We're not just producing vegetables, we're producing fruits and nuts, we're producing animal products, we're producing other products for survival. We also need diversity in scales, right? For some people, it's going to make more sense for them to just have a backyard garden and communicate with other larger scale growers, right? But for some people, it's going to make sense to have larger scale agroforestry systems, right? We need a diversity of scales. The next thing we need is a diversity of genetics too, right? We need, if we look at the average American diet, we see that there's really a small number of things that people eat as far as grains, fruits, vegetables, and such goes. The more we diversify in our diet, the more diversity will be in the landscape around us if we're growing those things, right? And the more things that we grow in our environment, the more diverse the ecology will be, and the more diverse nutrients we'll have to take into our body. So diversity is important. The other reason diversity is important is because if one element of that system fails, then the system will be able to carry on and still produce things. So an example is, most of the commodity agriculture in the United States has been reduced to corn and soy, right? Monoculture farming. And most of it's not even for food production, really. A lot of it's exported, a lot of it is for ethanol, and a lot of it is for those horrible, confined feeding operations. But if a disease comes around and wipes out that corn, and that's all we got on hundreds of thousands of acres, we have a real problem, right? So diversity means not putting all our eggs in one basket. Moving on to redundancy, it's also kind of in another way not putting all your eggs in one basket. An example is, let's say, water systems. Here on our farm, we have city water, but we also have a well and we also have a spring, right? So there's redundancies in our system, and we also have rainwater catchment. So that's 4 levels of redundancy to meet our water needs. And redundancy makes the system resilient. And redundancy and diversity really super go hand in hand. besides redundancy, regenerative capacity, right? So does your system have the ability to build soil organic matter and nutrients, retain and slow water, and grow in diversity and health over time? That's really important. We could do all of these things. We could have the vegetable garden, we can have the livestock, we can have a dairy system, we can have all of this sort of stuff. But if we're not managing it regeneratively and sustainably, then we're just depleting our resources, right? There's so many farms in the United States where you could go and see just total soil erosion, loss of organic matter, overgrazing, which leads to soil compaction and further erosion and pollution of our watersheds. You know, when we're doing this stuff, we need to have regenerative capacity, because regenerative systems that build organic matter and build diversity in their systems, if there's a drought, they'll last longer. They'll be more healthy. If there is too much rain, they have a way of dealing with it. The earth is like a sponge. It can drain. It's not compacted. The water can infiltrate into the ground. You know, it's really important for us to have healthy ecosystems, because healthy ecosystems produce a healthy diversity of food and thus healthy humans. So regenerative capacity is super important. Then we have, you know, self-sufficiency, right? So what does that mean when looking at a homestead system? And that asks the question is, can the system continue without the industrial infrastructure, right? So for example, are you saving seeds? Not to say you have to save all your seeds, because you might have a neighbor that's saving one type of seed and you might be saving another type of seed or whatever. But if the system goes down and you can't purchase your seeds online, how does it keep perpetuating itself? It can't. You're kind of shut down. The other thing is closed loop fertility, you know, and that goes back to sort of regenerative systems that, you know, increase soil organic matter, right? We need to have closed loop fertility. We need to produce our own compost as much as we can, and we need to divert waste streams and put them back into the landscape as fertility. One example of what we do here is we have tree companies drop off wood chips on our property, and that slowly decomposes. So part of that will decompose and become rich humus-rich compost that we can add to our systems. But also we can use it as mulch to protect the system and to break down over time as sort of like a slow release nutrient. And otherwise, that would have been waste in you know, sort of the local system. They would have to pay to get rid of it. So we have to harvest that fertility and use it wisely. The next thing is sort of going back to that low tech sort of self-sufficiency, right? Are we reliant on electricity and consumables? Are we reliant on things like, you know, plastic seed trays that we won't be able to get one day, or that maybe ethically we don't totally agree with using? You know, we have to be self-sufficient. Is there a way to maybe instead do soil blocks, or to start seeds in the ground and then transplant them out from there? There's a lot of different ways that we can examine our systems and make sure that they're not relying on things that are bought in. The next pillar of homestead resilience is passivity. Yeah, low-tech solutions are usually the most resilient. Even for like heating your home, for example. If it gets cold in your climate and your house heats off of electricity, that's a pretty fragile system. If a windstorm happens and the power goes out, so does your heat. That's like super fragile, right? Whereas if you heat with a wood stove, which is a very passive system, all you have to do is go out into the forest and get some wood. You know, if you manage the wood sustainably, if your house is built sustainably with passive design, then it's quite easy to heat your home. You know, in one of these pictures right here, the bottom left corner is a house of my friend Cliff Davis over at Pig and Leaf Farm, also or formerly known as spiral ridge permaculture. And that home is built with a passive design, right? It's a straw bale house with a living roof, and it's incredibly insulated. So the amount of energy that's required to keep it heated and cooled is very low, and it's cooled naturally. He doesn't have an HVAC unit. He doesn't have central AC. He has this super insulation from the elements outside of his house that is keeping it at a steady temperature. And when it gets really cold, all he uses is a wood stove to heat up, and it's resilient. No matter what happens outside of his system, it's going to keep going. Next is repairability. Are our tools repairable, and the things that we use to keep our system going, are they repairable? Right? Going back to a tractor, and to be clear, it's not to say that you shouldn't use a tractor or you shouldn't use a chainsaw, or you shouldn't get that sawmill. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that to have these underlying systems that are repairable, right? If a tractor goes down because a piece of it is broken and you can't get that piece, then your system is down. That's not resilient. If you have a horse with a cultivator that's made of wood and hard steel, it's actually pretty easy to fix that just by going out into the forest and getting some wood and repairing it. If you have to fix the steel portions, you can use a forge that's powered by air and charcoal that you can make from wood, and you can repair it. That's a resilient system. It can keep going if the system has a hiccup or collapses. So we have to be able to repair as much of the tools and elements of our system that we can. Next is manageability. So are we able to actually keep what we're doing going, given whatever restraints and capacity that we have, right? We all have limitations. That's a realistic thing, right? One of the most common things for homesteaders when they first start off is that they just start doing everything. They're like, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, and then everything falls apart. And they're like, well, let's hold on to this and hold on to this and hold on to this. And it might just be a natural sort of progression of how it works when you get into homesteading, but understanding what we can actively manage is something that we should think about. And we should also think about how our capacities to sustain our system can change over time. So over time, we're going to be, as our knowledge and our skills and our tools increase, we're going to be able to do more over time. But then again, if you have a kid, if you have a new kid that's born into your family, and you don't want to neglect the child and you have too much going on, you might have to sacrifice some parts of your system to tend your child. So it can go forward, but it can also go back in time, right? And a way to increase our capacity always is the possibility of community, right? The community can always, and the possibility of human power to come together, and the possibility of tools to help us out, both physical tools and community tools to help us out, that can always increase our ability to expand our systems and manage it sustainably. Another pillar of homesteading is productivity and efficiency, right? We don't want to be putting all sorts of energy out there and not be getting that much in return. We have to think about efficiency. And the last pillar of homestead resilience is security. The social political landscape is largely unpredictable at our time, and we just have to be prepared for that. And that could be a whole talk on its own. So I won't go too much into that, but it's definitely something that you should think about. Some elements that might exist on a resilient homestead are, the following. The first 4 or 5 are basically substitutes for electric food storage systems like refrigerators, right? So in all the old homesteads around here in Tennessee, you'll always find a root cellar, a place where they could, keep the stored goods, the canned goods, the fermenting goods, the root crops, all that stuff. A root cellar is super important. Smoker, right? Can we smoke our foods? You don't just smoke meats, you can smoke other things to preserve them as well. Then curing systems, curing curing meats, fermenting vegetables, those are elements of a resilient system, right? Not relying on that sort of electric infrastructure. Passive drying systems, so like a solar food dehydrator, dry storage spaces. That's one of the most underrated things for people who get into farming and homesteading. It's just space to put all your crops where they're not getting affected by the elements. That's super important. A passive greenhouse for propagating plants and growing through the winter is a really great element to have in a resilient homestead, but it's also not 100% essential, right? You can grow within your growing season and just maximize on that and have it last through the winter, and if you can't build a greenhouse. So then vegetable gardens, staple crop production, so like grains, potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squashes, pumpkins, things that are gonna really kind of get you through the winter and produce a lot of bulk carbohydrates, proteins, stuff like that. So the vegetable garden might be on a smaller scale. The staple crop production might be on a larger scale. Then there's livestock systems for meat. Also livestock systems in the form of dairy systems. I know Will Tuttle was talking about how sort of against he is, animal systems, and I feel that compassion, and I understand where he's coming from, but also simultaneously, one of the most resilient systems that you can have on a farm is a dairy system. Because, for example, if you have a grass-fed dairy cow, a few of them, right, or even a grass-fed goat system, right, which is what we have done historically here, that system can 100% of the time be producing both fertility for the landscape and a product that you can survive and sustain off of, right? Milk, yogurt, cheese, meat. And it can produce milk, yogurt, and cheese all the time, every single day. Every single day it's giving you a product. So if everything else fails, you got that. As long as you can give them grazable space and hay for the winter time, the system can carry on. And that's why that system has been so important for traditional farming cultures. Next is fruit, nut trees, bushes and vines, and also herbs and perennials. Those are all important things to have in sort of a diverse permaculture system. Another thing that people often forget about is woodland, right? For firewood and for craft. Like a lot of times when people homestead, they either go to buy a property that has no woods at all, is just open cleared land, and that has benefits for starting new fruit trees and nut trees, but you don't have any firewood or craft material. And then on the other side, you have people who buy properties that are almost 100% woodland. And if they want to plant a fruit tree or plant a garden, they got to cut down a bunch of trees to do it. So having that diversity is super important. Obviously, community, we already talked about. Natural systems for heating and cooling are important, like we already talked about. Low-tech solutions, transition tools and technologies. So like maybe the solar panel, maybe the rainwater catchment with the gravity-fed irrigation system. Seed saving, we already talked about, is super important, and closed-loop fertility. I think I'm coming up on my time limit, but let me see if I can do a few more here. So traditional and indigenous cultures, like I was saying in the beginning of the talk, we don't have to invent a super huge amount of new things to kind of get where we need to go. We can look towards these historic cultures to sort of get there. So there's a lot of stuff that we can look to. I think Derek popped up and my time period is coming to an end. So let me take the
I do want to ask Jonathan, though,
Yeah.
this isn't your time, and we appreciate everything you've just presented. I mean, thank you so much. There's lots of valuable information. Would it be possible for us to get your presentation and maybe make it available on the website when we upload your talk so that people who want to see the full thing can click through it? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd totally be happy to share that with you guys. 100%.
Awesome. Well, we thank you so much for joining us again. It's Jonathan Ramirez with Thriving Earth Farm in Tennessee. Thank you so much, brother, for sharing your knowledge.
Appreciate it.
As we wake up to a new normal today and life is slowly grinding to a halt.
Now masks are becoming the new normal.
Americans are facing a new normal, one that may include losing their jobs, losing their income, and even losing their health insurance.
I don't think we get back to normal. I think we get back, or we get to a new normal.
It's time to reject the new normal.
Now is a historical moment, a time not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
It's time to reject the Great Reset.
It's time to support the People's Reset.
It's time for the Greater Reset.
From January 25th to the 29th, journalists, activists, researchers, and advocates are hosting the Greater Reset Activation, a 5-day event dedicated to offering an alternative to the World Economic Forum's top-down, centralized, authoritarian vision. Our desire is to help all people find community and liberty by providing practical steps and knowledge for co-creating a world that respects individual liberty, bodily autonomy, and choice.
The Greater Reset is the world's collective response to the World Economic Forum's initiative, the Great Reset. We invite you to join us for 5 days of discussion about the diverse opportunities available for those who seek to live in harmony with humanity and the planet, while respecting our innate freedom.
Each day is dedicated to a different domain and provides solutions to the WEF's vision. Day 1 is dedicated to the Agora and decentralized economics. Tuesday the 26th will focus on health and education. Day 3 will focus on nature, permaculture, and regenerative agriculture. Thursday the 28th will highlight the liberating side of digital technology, including encryption, blockchain, and decentralized autonomous organizations. On Friday, January 29th, we will end the event by showcasing examples of intentional communities, freedom cells, and community organizing.
Don't miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to hear from some of the most powerful speakers in the world with a focus on solutions. We encourage everyone to organize local watch parties in your area using freedomcells.org. Also, find out more about the Greater Getaway in-person event in Zihuatanejo, Mexico. Visit thegreaterreset.org for more information.